Before we start the video, quick announcement. You can join for just $10 and gain access to my server, which includes notes, weekly lessons, and more. Your support helps fund thumbnails, editing, and other content. Jazakumullah khair. Now, let's get back to the video. Inshallah, today I got Brother Leafy with me here. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So we're going to be today, inshallah, refuting Testify on another video. This video will particularly be contrasting the Gospel of John's historicity with Mecca within the Hadith and Quran, describing the historicity of the city of Mecca. So inshallah, we're going to be doing this video, and we'll be doing another video with the brother here. I'm going to be putting the link for his channel in the description, inshallah. Check him out.
Muslims say that the Gospel of John is late, exaggerated, and full of legendary fluff, while claiming the Quran and Islamic traditions are historically rock solid. But a closer look reveals the exact opposite. Muslims believe Mecca is Islam's holiest city, yet the Quran explicitly names it just once. Sure, they claim indirect references like Mecca or Mother of Cities, but that's rather vague. Islamic traditions go way further.
So what Testify fails to understand here is that the verse referencing Mecca is a clear-cut reference to Mecca, and this is accepted by mainstream scholars like Nicholas Sinai. So this is not a wishy-washy or vague reference to Mecca. It is a clear-cut reference that all scholars accept.
Yeah, and another thing is, like, if his standard is like, oh, we got to be skeptical about Mecca being in the Quran or they actually referring to Mecca, because Mecca's only mentioned once by name. Bro, Testify, you don't even have one time where the Trinity is mentioned by name.
It seems to me, although I shall not argue it here, that even if you regard the New Testament as an infallible source of doctrine, you could not derive from it a doctrine of the Trinity. Although there are many passages in the New Testament which speak of Christ as divine, and other passages which speak of the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Christ and of the Comforter, there are non-Trinitarian ways of interpreting the latter passages, which are just as plausible as interpreting them as expressing a doctrine of the Trinity.
Mother of Cities, but that's rather vague. Islamic traditions go way further. Abu al-Walid Azraqi. Abu al-Walid Azraqi.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi,
writing about 230 years after Muhammad, said the Kaaba existed 40 years before Allah created Earth, Adam made Hajj, and Abraham chose Mecca's location from heaven with angelic help. Historian Patricia Crone wasn't buying it. She points out glaring issues. Mecca, supposedly a key trade hub, doesn't even appear on 6th and 7th century maps. Byzantine, Persian, Greek, Latin, Syriac, Aramaic, and Coptic records are all silent about Mecca and Muhammad's Quraysh tribe. If Mecca was so bustling, why was it invisible outside Islamic sources for 2 whole centuries? Yet nearby, less important towns like Yathrib, Khaybar, Mamre, and even distant Petra are well documented. But Mecca, complete silence.
Patricia Crone is not an authority for Muslims. She's a revisionist Orientalist that got publicity from coming up with her nonsense theories that are ahistorical, and she's made countless retractions, and no Muslim should take her seriously. She's been refuted by scholar R.B. Sargent, who said, quote, in the review article where he reviewed her book, Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, Misconceptions and Flawed Polemics, he says, quote, Meccan Trade sets out to prove that the accepted history of the rise of Islam is largely a fabrication, that the security system established by Quraysh for caravan trade, if it existed at all, was of a minor local sort, and that pre-Islamic Mecca was a quite unimportant sanctuary. Its author starts with deep-seated prejudices to produce a confused, irrational, illogical polemic, further complicated by her misunderstandings of Arabic texts, her lack of comprehension of the social structure of Arabia, and twisting of the clear sense of other writings, ancient or modern, to suit her contentions. He goes on to refute all her claims. Overall, Sargent proves that she has a preconceived aim. She clearly decided at the beginning that Mecca was an invention, and then read all the data to forcibly suit that conclusion in an ad hoc way. So that's why Sargent accuses her methodology of being confused, irrational, and illogical, and overshadowing real nuance of pre-Islamic Arabian sources. I'll give you some examples from his review article. So Crone doubts the fact that the Arabians, that the people of Arabia, would have Rihlat al-Shita'i was-Sayf, which is the night journey that they would make twice a year. Sargent responds, he says, quote, in brief, on the evidence of Arabic texts at our disposal, linked also with the existence of parallel institutions in Arabia, to say nothing of mere probability, there is no valid reason to doubt that Quraysh did make journeys twice a year to purchase supplies of grain for commerce in general, right? So he sees no reason to doubt this. Second point here. Another example of Crone's misunderstandings is as follows. He says, quote, rhetorically, Dr. Crone exclaims, yet the Meccans claim that bulky woolens carried by caravans from the Hijaz to Syria at a distance of 800 miles would be cheaper for Syrians than what they could buy at home. It makes no sense, she says, right? Certainly it does not. But then the text does not say this. She rejects the idea that Meccans dominated the exchange of goods between northern Arabia and southern Syria, but the Arabic sources upon which she relies do not suggest that they did, nor does the argument that because a commodity was plentiful in Syria and Byzantium, these countries would be uninterested in importing it from elsewhere take any account of the taste for foreign rarities, fluctuations of prices, or sacrecies arising from political action. Nor does she consider such accidents as piracy, weather conditions, and the many other factors that affect trading. In fact, her whole treatment of this subject is strictly mechanical, not allowing for such eventualities. So again, another blunder by her. To sum up his review article, quote, the impression of the author left by reading Dr. Crone's work is that of a clever undergraduate at a student debate, intent to win on the points at issue, but neither overly careful in interpreting the historical sources, nor with any scruples at twisting what has already been said to make it fit her argument. Her book may gain her the publicity it is clearly designed to do, but it will in no way advance our understanding of early Islamic origins. Crone is a complete sham. This book is a complete sham. It's not. You say she's a historian. This is a work of historical fiction. That's what it is. Historical fiction, historical revisionism. This is a joke. No one takes this seriously. So the fact that Testify doesn't know this just shows his utter incompetence and ignorance and dishonesty. Because if he was ignorant, he should have looked it up. And the fact that he doesn't check the sources that he uses, he just goes for the most damaging one that's going to damage Islam the most, regardless of how authentic or reliable or sound the methodology is. It just shows how insincere and desperate he is for apologetics against Islam. So this book is not a book of history. It's a book of polemics, and it's a book of fiction as far as actual historians are concerned.
Why would traders abandon the easy coastal Red Sea route for a pointless hundreds of mile dangerous detour inland through barren deserts to visit Mecca, the city nobody else seemed to know existed? Crone labels Mecca's historical claims as pure fabrications, designed more for theological prestige than historical accuracy.
This is like stupidity, right? So I already refuted this claim. I've given plenty of reasons for why someone would go to an illogical trade route. So, for example, if someone has political alliances with someone, it's natural that they might not take the most efficient route. Or they might have other reasons such as price fluctuations. Again, this has been refuted with the quote about Crone assuming that people would act like robots, like mechanically. But in reality, humans don't act always logically. So think about, for example, your mum. When your mum goes to buy tomatoes, she's going to end up spending an hour at the grocery shop, going up and down, left and right, going to this place and that place before she finally goes and gets those tomatoes, right? If you track your mom's trade route, is it going to be a logical trade route? No, she's going to, maybe she starts off initially thinking she wants tomatoes, but then she finds another place that's a little bit cheaper, so she goes there. Or she sees maybe this guy will be cheaper, so she goes up there, she finds he's not as cheap, she comes back down. So her trade route might not be always logical, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, or this is like some type of evidence against Islam. Again, this is just a weak argument from silence that's already been refuted.
Yeah, so and the funny thing is, Testify himself, he gives really ad hoc reinterpretations, illogical interpretations to responses about criticisms of the Gospels himself, and yet he's satisfied with that. But it's a sort of thing where it's satisfactory for me, but for you guys have to give a logical explanation for everything. And these trade routes, they all got to be logical. But for Christianity, logic goes out the window because obviously I love to beg the question, right? So I love to be circular, and I love to just assume the truthfulness of my religion, and yeah, I can have my cake and eat it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a clear double standard. I mean, the contradiction with Judas, with the account of Judas, is way more historically implausible than any trade routes. In fact, I mean, I'll just reread the quote again. Take any account of she doesn't take into account any of the taste for foreign rarities, fluctuations of prices, sacrecies arising from political action, nor does she consider accidents such as piracy, weather conditions, or many other factors that affect strict trading. In fact, her whole treatment of the subject is strictly mechanical, not allowing for such eventualities. That's much more historically plausible than the account of Jesus, someone falling both headlong and killing himself at the same time.
So they may have shared more information about Judas's death, which later show up in Matthew. While I understand that this one isn't going to satisfy most critics, I don't think that the two accounts are hopelessly contradictory, and sometimes truth is just stranger than fiction.
I mean, yeah, so you can clearly see, like, the one account says that Judas is the one who gave them the money. The other account says that it wasn't him, it was someone else. And he says, oh, the priests, Judas acted with, the priest acted through Judas. So he just like gives an ad hoc justification. Instead of just reading it prima facie and realizing that there's a contradiction, we're just going to do the most ad hoc justification possible. It doesn't matter about the plausibility or what the Gospels actually say, what the writers actually meant. We're just going to assume inerrancy and blind ourselves to the evidence. So again, this is just like stupidity on his.
Pray. Shockingly, he found the earliest Islamic mosques don't even point to Mecca at all. Instead, dozens of them, built with pinpoint accuracy, face Petra in modern-day Jordan. Not Mecca, but Petra.
I mean, it's also important to note here that pretty much every other like mainstream scholar acknowledges that the Islamic sources do have a basis in history. Like, for example, Montgomery Watt also agrees with us. We also have other scholars like F.F. Peters. They also agree with us that Mecca was a sanctuary before in the times of Jahiliyyah, and other scholars as well. For example, Irfan Shahid as well. He also writes about this in his book Byzantium and the Arabs in the 6th century. So pretty much all mainstream scholars and historians agree with the traditional Islamic narrative on this issue. It's only revisionists, Orientalists like Cook, Crone, and what's his name, Wansbrough, who believe this nonsense and support this nonsense.
Such as the book showing that the earliest mosques face Petra and not Mecca. As I said, not to be believed. This is all nonsense. These mosques all face Mecca. Every single one of them faces Mecca, whether they're facing south or east, or they were built to face the Qibla.
A.J. Juice, who's a scholar in his own right, and talking about Dan Gibson, he says, quote, "But credit to whom credit belongs. It was a work by Dan Gibson which brought forth a claim that Petra was a focal point of the Umayyads that caught my attention. I was puzzled that all my sweat did not bring forth such a spectacular result. Indeed, no result at all. Petra never showed up on my maps. But it was not Gibson's quality of research that triggered my curiosity. Instead, I was perplexed that he could have come to any conclusion with his methodology short of wanting it to be Petra. What struck me is that his system, save for arguments that I was unable to logically follow, would invalidate any target location, even if it were in Hawaii." So clearly we see that Dan Gibson's methodology is flawed. The way he uses satellites, the way he cherry picks mosques, he doesn't even date them correctly. I mean, this guy's an absolute joke. The fact that you think he's an authority is, again, like, this is like, I mean, I just want the audience to ask themselves, like, do you guys actually think that, is it a coincidence that Testify is picking the most fringe, revisionist, far-reaching scholarship? Is that just a coincidence, or is it like a quality of someone who is dishonest? Why can't he quote someone neutral who's fair and honest and come with genuine critiques of Islam? It just shows he's disingenuous. Like, that's all it shows. And now, in terms of David King, he says in his book, the Petra Fallacy, he says, quote, "Gibson thinks that Muslims should have been praying towards Petra for the past millennium, as he thinks that they did in the first 2 centuries of Islam. For the time being, though, practicing Muslims can happily ignore Gibson's outrageous suggestion that they start praying towards Petra again. They also don't need to worry about Deuce's pronouncements that their mosques have never been oriented towards Mecca. This independent observer suggests that Muslims should simply carry on praying towards the Kaaba as they have been doing for the past 1,400 years. So again, this guy's a joke. No one takes him seriously. If he's an archaeologist, I don't know what that makes me, bro.
But Petra. Even the Quran paints a bizarre picture, describing Muhammad's opponents as growers of wheat, grapes, olives, and dates. Seriously? Mecca?
So he brings Quran chapter 6, verse 99, but then he brings like a bunch of weird references. I don't even know how to make that out. So when me and Brother Leafy were recording this video, like I don't know what we're supposed to do with that. Apparently Testify thinks that there's chapter 141 in the Quran. So there you go. But Yeah. The other references, as Brother Leafy will mention, they all don't imply at all that you're going to find these things in Mecca. Rather, just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about the signs that are given generally. It doesn't have to be specific to Mecca, right?
In English. It says, quote, "And it is he who sends down rain from the sky, and we produce thereby the growth of all things. We produce from it greenery, which we produce grains arranged in layers, and from the palm trees of its emerging fruit are clusters hanging low. And we produce gardens of grapevines and olives and pomegranates, similar yet varied. Look at each of its fruit when it yields and when it's ripening. Indeed, in it are signs for people who believe." So nothing in this verse indicates that these vines or these plants or these greeneries are present in Mecca. God is just simply talking about these in generalities. So the same thing with the other verses.
But somewhere closer to the Mediterranean, where these crops actually thrived. Muslims will proudly point to the miraculous Zamzam well, claiming it's divinely supplied and inexhaustible. But today, that miracle is entirely propped up by desalination plants built by the West.
Never heard of this opinion, and I've never seen a nos for it, so I don't know where he's getting it from. And I mean, I just have like logical reasons to be skeptical for this, because if it was true that we had a well that like had unlimited water, why wouldn't we just like solve dehydration in the world? That just makes no sense. So I don't think this is true. And coming from Testify, I mean, I take it with like a mountain of salt, everything he says.
The real history. While Islamic tradition struggles to prove Mecca even existed, the Bible gives us names, distances, landmarks, stuff that checks out. So if you're like me, a homeschooling dad, it's powerful to bring something to Genesis, which is perfect for kicking off biblical history with your family. Hit the link in the description and use my code TESTIFY for a discount. You'll be supporting local businesses in Israel and my channel when you do, and be getting great gifts that your whole family will enjoy. Now, back to actual history. Let's as a kuffar here.
This guy, he tries to undermine Muslim apologists, calling them unemployed when they're spending all their time responding to his nonsense, right? But then he goes on and like partners with some genocidal maniacs, right? With some Zionist maniacs to to have him basically sit on his bum all day, applying Wojaks to YouTube videos for 2-second attention span, the goldfishes that just consume his content like it's constant garbage material, right? But it's like, yeah, me as a Christian apologist, and bro, like this is a major problem, right? That you wanted to discuss before. The likes of David Wood, Apus, this guy, all these guys are getting funded for really really crappy content that no Muslim really is getting funded for to respond to. And Apus, I think Apus even obviously part of why he became Christian is a much of a coincidence that he got donated. Actually, did you know he got donated $100,000 in less than a month for security systems by basically Christians who wanted to support him after he debated a Muslim. Did you know that?
Yeah, I mean, like that's absolutely like outrageous. But I mean, it's not surprising. Like as soon as you go, you put on the little cap, you kiss the wall, you say you're a Christian or a Jew, or you subscribe to Zionism, you just get a bunch of checks from the people at the top. So I mean, it's not surprising. But what is disappointing is that we have people here who just regurgitate like refuted Orientalist arguments from 40 years ago by revisionists and tries to prop them up as some type of authority, even though the arguments are complete nonsense, as me and Brother Dean have shown. And yet we can't get people to support people like Brother Dean and I, who are doing actual research, refuting these people, refuting these clowns, and genuinely doing a service for the Ummah. So us Muslims, we need to up our game in terms of what we do, how we produce our content, and responding to these shubuhat on a much better intellectual level. We need to show that Islam has intellectual rigor. We are able to respond and refute these nonsensical claims against our religion and show the intellectual veracity of our religion against its enemies. So Jazakumullah, please support Brother Dean in his work. He works day and night to get you guys this content and make sure that everything is accurate.
Jazakallah khair, and likewise, bro. And it is a big issue. Like, I've never had once a sponsorship on this channel, nor have I went out of my way to do it. The only reason why I even made that Discord server, where right now only Patreon members can gain access to, The only main reason I did that is so I can make a foundation for now me to get funded to do this content. But really, should it take for me to put in all that effort and make all those channels and give all these perks and spend so much time on a Discord server in order for me to get funded to give proper dawah or responses or rebuttals to these claims? I mean, like, you don't see Testify out here or David Wood out here or Apos out here putting any hours or time or proper research into their like regurgitation. So like, yeah, as you said, it's like disappointing, but inshallah, like the ummah can like up their game in this aspect. And but we're not alone in our opinion on this. Like many da'is in the background have talked to me about this.
I mean, also another point that's very important is that it's very easy just to make a claim. It's a much longer thing to refute that claim. So for every nonsense claim they make, it takes like double or if not triple the amount of time to double check the sources, make sure they didn't mistranslate anything, judge the soundness of the argument, and point exactly like where they went wrong in their argument. And all of that takes time, energy, effort, resources that the Muslims, again, are lacking on. So again, if Apos and David Wood can sit there and stream for 2 hours and get donations from Islamophobes by just parroting nonsense from revisionist Orientalists, why can't we Muslims muster up the courage to support people refuting these shubuhat and converting people to Islam, spreading the deen, and establishing the truth? It's very disappointing.
Contrast this fiasco with the Gospel of John, often ridiculed by Muslim polemicists as legendary. Unlike the sketchy history of Mecca, John's author nails minor geographic details effortlessly. When people leave Cana for Capernaum, John casually says that they're going down, precisely matching the actual elevation change. John correctly places Bethany near Jerusalem and accurately gives its distance as 15 furlongs, about 2 miles, from the city, exactly matching geography today. He gets the width of the Sea of Galilee exactly right, describing it as 3 to 4 miles across, precisely aligning with modern measurements. He also accurately pinpoints Jerusalem's Pool of Siloam and the Pool of Bethesda, carefully noting Bethesda had 5 covered colonnades, an architectural detail that has been perfectly confirmed by archaeology nearly 2,000 years later. Even the seemingly minor detail of Jesus walking in Solomon's colonnade fits perfectly. This covered walkway historically provided ideal protection from cold winter winds, exactly as John described. Notably, this precise location is where Jesus made the bold declaration, "I and my Father are one." John's Gospel nails small, verifiable details with ease. Meanwhile, the Quran and Islamic tradition fumble major historical and geographical claims about their holiest city. The more we invest...
Yeah, I mean, so this is just like pathetic. Like, it's a fallacy to say just because you get some historical details right, therefore the whole thing is historical. For example, like the story of Spider-Man is placed in a historical place. It's in New York City, and it gets details of New York City right. Does that mean like the story of Spider-Man is historical? Obviously not. But that's the type of reasoning that the Jahil Testify decides to use. Anyway, like if you go to actual scholarship, like for example, E.P. Sanders talks about many of the contradictions in the Gospel of John and the historical anachronisms that are there.
Is also the fact that even after hundreds of years of writing the Gospel of John, you have an addition of an entire story, the story of the adulterous woman, from John 8:1 to John 8:12. That's about 12 verses added to the Gospel of John, a whole narrative that is ahistorical to what the author had written in the Gospel of John. And yet they're claiming, there's such good authorship, such good pristine historical knowledge and so on. Like, okay, like you're going to have a bunch of historical details that are true. Do you really have that as a sort of something to put on a pedestal while you have anonymous people adding stories without sources mentioned or anyone knowing where it came from? If we didn't have these manuscripts, we wouldn't know that these were additions anyways. The first time it ever appears is in Codex Bezae in the 5th century. Before that, you had the Codex Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus, Vaticanus, and amongst other fragmentary manuscripts. And those all don't have that story. Besides that, also, like the Christological historical inaccuracy is massive, because what you find is, as you said, in the Synoptics, you have Mark, you have Matthew, you have Luke, but not just that. What you also have is early patristic fathers, like you have Clement of Rome, right? In the 1st century, a Christian in the 1st century, in his to the Corinthians, so First Clement, he makes mention in that book no pre-existence of Jesus, and not just that, he actually interprets where God says, "Let us make man in our image." He actually interprets that in light of being the Father alone, rather than Jesus, which you would expect if you believed in a pre-existent Jesus, the sort of Christology that John presents. He would have mentioned this, right? So it's a strong argument from silence here. I know. Testify loves arguments from silence, as you saw. So this is a great argument from silence, not just from the Synoptics, but from Clement, and not just Clement. Yeah, Polycarp as well. In his letter to the Philippians, no mentioning of the pre-existence of Jesus anywhere, nowhere. So these are all independent sources from early Christians showing that they didn't believe in this pre-existent Christology that John's presenting, showing that's ahistorical.
Yeah, I mean, as we saw also with the clip from Richard Swinburne earlier, like these passages that are interpreted in terms of favoring the Trinity can just as plausibly be interpreted in a Unitarian way, as he himself admits. And Richard Swinburne, for those of you who don't know, is an Oxford professor, published, and one of the leading academics, Christian academics in the world. And also on the point of the story of the adulterous woman, telltale sign that it's a fabrication or a later addition is that certain manuscripts place it in different parts. So, for example, some manuscripts actually place it in Luke 21 as opposed to John. And this is a telltale sign of an addition because the scribes are not sure where to put it. And that's a sign that it wasn't there originally. Finally, also, the third historical error that I wanted to point out was the contradiction of the day of Jesus' death. I mean, the Gospel of John can't even get which day Jesus died, right? Was it 14 Nisan or 15 Nisan? I mean, according to E.P. Sanders, he says, quote, the consequence of these considerations is that we can say that neither that John was creative only with the teaching material, nor that he had a good source for his narrative and that he followed it faithfully. He says this is not convincing to anyone who's serious. Another source also says the same thing. So, for example, the Historical Jesus, it reads here, it says, the differences between John and the Synoptics cannot be reconciled. It is hardly possible to make a decision, but the arguments for the Johannine chronology are weightier. Right. So again, they agree that the differences between John and the Synoptics are irreconcilable. So one of them has to be wrong. One of them has to have an historical error.